All right, let's get right into it. We've got a major showdown brewing between the president and the Senate, and it's all about war powers. The flashpoint? Venezuela. And believe me, this isn't just some political squabble. We're talking about a fundamental clash over who exactly gets to decide when America sends in the troops.
And then, boom, the whole thing gets thrown into overdrive with this one statement. See, the president's response to the Senate wasn't just, hey, I disagree. It was a full-blown challenge to the very law they were using, calling the War Powers Act itself unconstitutional. That single quote just set the stage for a massive constitutional battle.
So to really get our heads around this, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the war powers fight that's happening right now. Then we'll dive into the constitutional arguments at the very heart of it. After that, we'll explore the reasons given for the recent action. And finally, we'll look at the proposed game plan for Venezuela from here.
Okay, let's start with the political power play that kicked this whole thing off on Capitol Hill.
So the first move in this chess match came from the Senate. They're pushing this resolution that's aimed squarely at Venezuela. The whole point is to force the president to come to them and get a green light before taking any more military action. This is basically Congress trying to flex its muscles, using a power it set up for itself way back after Vietnam to stop presidents from just deciding to go to war on their own.
And this, right here, lays out the two sides of the fight perfectly. On one hand, you have the Senate trying to pull the reins back on presidential power. But on the other hand, the White House is saying, whoa, hold on, this kind of restriction is actually dangerous. Their argument is that it ties the president's hands and, in the end, makes the country less safe.
And that brings us right to the heart of the matter, the legal debate. And it all boils down to one specific part of the U.S. Constitution. The entire argument from the White House hangs on what's called Article 2 authorities. So, what does that mean? Well, supporters say it's the part of the Constitution that gives the president, as commander-in-chief, the inherent power to act fast, really fast, to protect the country, especially when there's a clear and present danger. And here's that exact argument in a nutshell. The claim is that in a crisis, waiting around for Congress to debate and vote isn't just slow, it's a failure of the president's #1 job, protecting Americans. Those are the key words right there, quickly and decisively.
Now, here's where it gets really practical. It's not just about constitutional theory. Supporters of the president's power here raise a huge security concern. They call Congress a leaky bucket. The fear is, if you have to brief hundreds of members of Congress on a top-secret mission, the details are bound to get out, which could compromise the entire operation and get people killed.
So, with that legal backdrop, let's shift gears and look at the specific reasons they gave for this operation in Venezuela in the first place.
The justification really has three parts. First, they didn't call it a war. They framed it as a law enforcement action, like a police raid against the threat that was about to happen. Second, they connected it directly to the fentanyl crisis here at home, saying this was a way to cut off the supply. And third, they point to how it went down, super fast, troops on the ground for only an hour to grab Maduro. The argument is that this proves that decisive, unilateral action works.
Now, to really sell their case, supporters are pulling from the history books. They're drawing a straight line from what just happened in Venezuela all the way back to the U.S. invasion of Panama in 1989, when the military went in to take out Manuel Noriega.
And when you put the two operations side by side, it's really fascinating. The targets were similar, both painted as narco-terrorists, but the scale was completely different. But here's the knockout punch supporters are trying to land, the politics. Back in '89, a Republican president had full bipartisan support from a Democratic Congress. Today, they argue, the same kind of situation has become completely politicized.
Okay, so, with the administration making its case, their focus now pivots to the future. What's next for Venezuela? That brings us to the key players still on the board and the strategy for what comes next.
First up, you've got Delcy Rodriguez, the new interim president. She's described as a hardcore lefty, a true believer, a revolutionary whose own father was a famous socialist leader. Her entire background tells you that the ideology running the show is still deeply entrenched.
Then there's this guy, Diosdado Cabello. You could say he's the muscle of what's left of the regime. He doesn't just run the secret police. He controls the colectivos. And what are those? They're basically government-backed street gangs used to terrorize opponents and keep the population in line. He's the one holding things together with brute force. And rounding out the trio is Vladimir Lopez, the defense minister. The most important thing you need to know about him is this. There's a $15 million bounty on his head from the U.S. A price tag like that tells you just how central he is to the whole operation, especially when it comes to controlling the military.
So with these players still in the picture, the plan moves into what's being called Phase 2, and it has 4 clear goals. It's a sequence. First, you have to stop the drug trafficking and stop letting countries like Iran and Russia use Venezuela as a base. Once you have stability, then you can move to goal number 3, unlocking the country's massive oil industry. And that economic power is what's supposed to pave the way for the final goal, free and fair elections.
And that third point about oil, well, it's the absolute game changer. Just look at this number, 20%. Venezuela is sitting on an estimated 1/5 of the entire world's proven oil reserves. This is the engine that could bring the country back from the brink, and it's also the single biggest piece of leverage the U.S. has.
So here's where it all lands. You've got military leverage from the recent action, you've got this political power structure still in place, and you have this incredible economic prize on the table. The source lays out a very clear roadmap, but the one thing that no one knows for sure is what happens next.